Today we have Dr. George Mehaffy from ASKU, who's here to speak with us about leadership and change from a higher education perspective. Our facilitator is going to be our provost, Dr. Tadlock. He will, after Dr. Mehaffy says a few words, we'll come join him at the front of the room. Like last time, we have a video introduction from President Betts that I'm going to go ahead and have that shown, and he'll actually do a formal introduction of Dr. Mehaffy, and then we'll go from there. And Dr. Mehaffy will lead the discussion and facilitate questions and answers, and I think he may have a little surprise for you. We'll see. So with that being said, we'll roll the video.
Good afternoon and welcome again to the Leadership and Change Forum. You're in for a very special treat today. We have been able to secure the appearance of our special guest presenter, a gentleman whose work is well known by presidents and provosts across the United States, but also someone who I believe is one of the great educational leaders in America. George Mehaffy is the Vice President for Leadership and Change for the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, ASKU, of which Northeastern State is a member. And I've had the good fortune of working with George since 1999 when I became the provost at the University of Central Oklahoma. George is one of the leaders across the country that appreciates the role of state colleges and universities and actually propels our institutions to national prominence. He's been the progenitor of a number of very important initiatives, but perhaps two I will mention to you today. One is the American Democracy Project, of which NSU is a member. There are over 200 colleges and universities that have committed themselves to the American Democracy Project, to civic engagement, and to linking the work in the classroom to the work in our communities. George is the godfather of that process, and I will be eternally indebted to him for allowing me to play a role in that process, and for Northeastern State University to be so involved. And also, he never runs out of ideas and challenges. And last year, he began to help the whole country think about our undergraduate education experience. And he has devised a process called the Red Balloon Project. Again, NSU is involved. And what it's about is really reimagining undergraduate education. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are the outcomes? And what other opportunities we now have in front of us in order to reshape and make undergraduate education not just a relevant experience, but an inspiring experience that can really propel us into the new era. So it's with great enthusiasm that I present to you a colleague and friend, George Mehaffy.
Thank you so much. And Broken Arrow and Muskogee are here. Is there someone out there in the ether? Do we know? Oh, there they are. All right. Great. So welcome. First of all, I've never been anywhere where I've been introduced by the institutional president who is on another continent. That's a first. But the one that's really cool is that we walked in and I was so pleased. Laura she brought me in and did you see the cameras downstairs and all of the hubbub? And I thought, oh, well, it's not necessary to take pictures of me. I appreciate that. It turns out they were filming the Skunk Whisperer. There is such, apparently, I mean, who knew? There's apparently a skunk whisperer, and the skunk whisperer is going to entice the skunks out of under the administration building. And I thought, damn, it really works. I mean, prima facie evidence, it's already there. It's happening. Wow. So, well, anyway. So this has already been a stellar event for me, and I've only been on campus for about an hour now. But this is terrific, and but I wanted to do a conversation in two parts. I want to talk about leadership because that's what you're talking about, leadership and change, and then I want to talk about higher education. So I want to sort of split the hour into two parts, and I guess I'd really like to start with to ask somebody to be brave enough to raise their hand, or somebody back in wherever they are. They were there, but I know they're there, Muskogee or Broken Arrow. But why are you taking this course? Why are you interested in leadership? And I will call on one of you if you. Oh, thank you.
So
You're supposed to.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Society is changing at such a fast pace, and as us of the next generation, we're the ones that are going to have to lead it. So why not take this course to learn what those that have gone before us can teach us, and we can use.
Terrific answer. Anybody else? One other quick question, just one other quick response. Why are you taking this course? Why are you interested in this? Muskogee?
I think she summed it up well. I mean, for those of us who are going into higher education, it's a great opportunity to hear speakers from around, the world. Dr. Betsy's done a great job providing people from all different perspectives to come and share what they have learned, and what they're challenging others to, to think about. So I think it's a great opportunity for that.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I hope all of you are, and I appreciate your comment, your response in particular, because I think what we have to do is we all have to become students of leadership. I think we need to be thinking about leadership and watching people as leaders, and what are they doing that works and what are they doing that doesn't work. I've had two interesting careers. I've served for 35 or 40 years now in higher education, and simultaneously I served for 33 years in the United States Coast Guard Reserve. And so I was constantly having military and higher ed across simultaneously. And I just learned before here during lunch that Dalton Bigby and I share that experience because he was in the Navy for a similar number of years. And so when I think about leadership, I think about leadership in, and now, by the way, I watch 420 presidents at once. And some of them are fabulous, and some of them stub their toes in sort of spectacular fashion. In fact, we actually have a book that we promised that we're writing that'll have to be published posthumously called "What Were They Thinking?" And it's about the presidents that have a little bit of that toe stubbing problem. But I'm curious. Let me ask you a second question. How do you? I've always been curious. There are more books written on leadership than almost any other subject on earth. And it's curious to me how much discussion there is about this. But one of the questions is leadership, from your perspective, from the studies and the research and the reports and the people that have come to speak to you, is leadership born or instilled? Does it come out of one's personality, or is it actually something you can learn?
I think it's something that can be developed. I think it's something that you can, I think there's different types of leadership, and every person has a various type within them that they can bring out and develop. And I think once somebody identifies where they, where they really are able to thrive, then they can develop that if they have once they find their passion for something.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that leadership is activated. I think everyone has the qualities of leadership or has that capacity, but many times there are external forces that activate someone into those roles. If it's a mentor, or if you see a problem and you decide that you're very passionate about it, and that's something a cause that you want to champion, I think that the real perspective is that you have to activate the leadership.
Okay, good, great. Second question are leadership qualities universal or are they contextual? That is, are leadership qualities a set of strategies that you always use and always work, or does it change by context?
I think there are certain characteristics that you can utilize. I've been disconnected constantly. So I'll just speak loudly. I think that there are certain characteristics that apply to every situation, such as integrity. I don't think you can go wrong being an integritous person, but I think there are very contextual characteristics for certain jobs. You don't need to be a domineering leader in certain leadership situations when you have a perfectly capable board, for example.
Okay. Gosh, good group. Yeah, And I'm glad you said that, because I was about to say my experience with the military, and I've taken, I can't count the number of leadership courses I've taken, the number of leadership books I've read, in part because I'm fascinated by it, and in part because it's part of my current job to watch these 420 presidents and 420 provosts and a whole lot of other folks as leaders in their institutions. And I compare that to my military experience, which was admittedly the Coast Guard, not Marine Corps. I mean, we're not hardcore military, but nevertheless, I mean, we were sort of the softies in the group. But nevertheless, the distinctions were pretty dramatic. That there were things that you did when I walked into the room as a commanding officer. First of all, everybody stood up, and that was just the way it started. And if I said walk, everybody started walking. But there were other parts of the leadership capacity, or the strategies and skills and the qualities and characteristics, that were true there and in higher education. I absolutely agree with you. That I think some of it's contextual and some of it is not contextual. The way you treat people, whether or not they salute and say yes sir, or whether they're in a higher ed a university somewhere, the way you treat people, whether you treat people with respect, is always the same. And people know immediately whether you're respecting them or not. And yet there are other things that are very different. You don't tell faculty you would not expect faculty to stand up in a faculty senate when you walked into the room. In fact, you'd be horrified because they were probably getting up to leave the room. But anyway. A couple other really quick notions, and then I want a little more discussion among us. One of the things I like to do is Google leadership rules. And there are lots of those around. There's leadership rules of Attila the Hun. Those are slightly different than the ones that we probably want to encourage. But and then there's leadership rules that I learned in elementary school. Stick together, watch, hold hands crossing the street. Stuff. But for me, this maybe the best set of leadership rules was Colin Powell's. Let me give them to you. 13, real quick. I'll just run through them real quick. It ain't as bad as you think. It will look better in the morning. That means slow down. Don't panic. Don't get mad, then get over it. It's not ever about you. It's about solving the problem. And people get all wrapped up in themselves. Avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position fails, it falls, your ego goes with it. Rule 4 is it can be done. There's a certain insistence that this is really important. Rule 5 is be careful whom you choose. Rule 6, don't let adverse facts stand in the way of a good decision. In higher ed, we sometimes think ourselves to death, and the consequence is paralysis, not analysis. Rule 7, you can't make someone else's decisions. You shouldn't make someone else, let someone else make yours. Here's a great example of that. One of the things that we do, I think somebody said higher education, we're overmanaged and underled. I think there's a lot of truth in that aphorism. One of the things that I see in leadership is the people that are most successful are the people who most of the time are not micromanagers. We'll get back to that in a minute. But most of the people, most of the time, are leaving people alone they frame the work and then leave people alone to get the work done. The great example for me was I was a young lieutenant. I'd just moved from enlisted to officer in the Coast Guard. I got to be the commanding officer at a lifeboat station down on the Gulf Coast. The commanding officer's letter to me was this letter. I'll never forget it as long as I live. He said, "Congratulations, Lieutenant Mehaffy. You have passed the watch officer's qualification, and you are now the first reserve officer to ever be qualified as a watch officer at this search and rescue station. You are now empowered to launch the 40-foot patrol boats to go out and rescue people in the Gulf of Mexico. You're empowered to call to launch helos out of New Orleans. You were empowered, and on and on. And man, I was feeling pretty cool. till I got to the last paragraph. He said, however, I am irretrievably responsible for this command. And therefore, you will call me in these following circumstances. And the list was as long as the empowerment that I'd had earlier. Because he understood that while I had authority, that he ultimately had responsibility. It was his lifeboat station, not mine. Rule 8, this is Colin Powell, back to Colin Powell. Check small things. The best coaches are masters of detail. Rule 9, share credit. Rule 10, remain calm, be kind. Rule 11, have a vision, be demanding. Rule 12, don't take counsel of your fears or naysayers. And Rule 13, the one I love the most, is perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. Isn't that great? Well, let me say one other thing about leadership, and then we're going to stop this part of it now because I want to hear your comments about it as well. I think that when I think about, and you could get lost in all of this stuff because there are 40 gazillion lists of leadership traits and skills. There are thousands of books on leadership, and part of it, when I try to distill all that down, I think there are two things that for me are at the heart of the work. I mean, you've got to be a decent human being. The integrity issue that you raised is absolutely the core. One of the old jokes is never lie. Then you don't have to remember what you said. But when you lie as a leader, you've lost everything. So integrity is at the heart of this. There are a couple like that. But to make change, which is leadership for change rather than just leadership, to make change, and by the way, that's what most leadership is about, is change. It's not just management is just keeping the trains running on time. Leadership is changing things, and none of us want to change. None of us want to be changed. Let me make it more accurate. We don't mind changing. We just don't want to be changed by somebody else. But I think if there are two that for me are at the heart of the work, and this gentleman up here hinted at it earlier in your response. One of the things is about grand ideas. You've got to have grand ideas. George Bush famously observed it was that vision thing. Yeah, it is that vision thing. Give you a classic example. Jimmy Wales. Anybody know who Jimmy Wales is? Hands, anybody? Laura knows. I just said it at lunch. Come on now. See, she wasn't listening. What did he invent? No. I was trying to build you up. Oh, wait. Thank you, right here. Wikipedia, thank you. The inventor of Wikipedia. I was trying to give you a shot. I was trying to help. Sorry. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, I promise. But anyway, Jimmy Wales said, in 2001, Jimmy Wales said this. He said, my dream is to create an encyclopedia at your fingertips in your language for every human being on earth. Okay? That was his dream. Guess what? It's now been 10 years since his dream. It's in 178 languages. It's 33 million entries. It's as accurate as Encyclopedia Britannica. It's operated by 50 people in a not-for-profit company. Okay? That's not shabby for a grand vision. The second thing you have to have with the grand vision is passion to make it happen. You've got to be the one that stays up nights, talks about it on weekends, dreams it in your sleep, thinks about it and talks about it, because passion is contagious. Passion makes people pay attention. So I don't know how you get those two. I'm not sure how that all works. I don't know how you get great ideas, and I don't know how you get the passion for it. But I do know this. If you don't have passion and great ideas, I don't care how nice a person you are, you're not moving the agenda very much, because people aren't going to follow you. They're going to like you, but they're not going to follow you. And that, for me, is the distinction. So what I'd like to do is stop for just a minute, talk about this stuff, and then we're going to move on to higher education because I've got a couple of comments, brief comments about higher ed as well. I was giving Laura a hard time at lunch about some of this, but anyway. So, comments about leadership. Muskogee, you guys are there listening? Yes, there they are. Look. Oh, I never get it right. Okay, sorry, Broken Arrow. We're glad you're here. So, comments from you about leadership. What are your experiences and observations?
Just call on them by name if you want.
Pam?
All right, who ratted me out?
I'm not reporting.
Your last two comments spoke to me about the having grand ideas and vision and the passion to make it happen. Because as I think about successful activities across our campus, those are the two common denominators. And so I really appreciate that succinct way of putting that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Since he's not here, so I'm not kissing up as much, but I would say that's what Dr. Betts has done in this university. And I have thought, I would have said enthusiasm, but vision and enthusiasm together. And I really think he has that, so I'm not sorry I said that, but I'll give him credit for that.
No, and I'm not sucking up either. I happen to be here. First of all, he's a personal friend, but I have enormous admiration for Don because he's always willing to look at new ideas and think about them. He always looks at them in the context of you guys. He's loyal to a fault about saying, well, yeah, but how will it play at Northeastern? But he not only is sort of processing it sort of in an intellectual way, but he's processing enthusiastically, and so he approaches things with both an enthusiasm and a passion. It's kind of interesting. You raised that, you put that word in there, and I use passion, and I'm not actually sure how I would distinguish the two because they're largely in the same arena. But I see that, and what's striking to me about leadership, by the way, is that as I look across the 420 presidents and ask you, leadership comes in very different sizes and shapes. It's amazing. Tall, short, male, female, black, white, and also what's interesting is even styles within higher ed. You've got the sort of imperial president, not really the kind of person you'd want to go up and spend a lot of time with, but they're still effective. And then there are others that you'd love to, as someone famously observed, go have a beer with or something. But I'm amazed at the range of people who are successful leaders. It's absolutely astonishing, which really underscores the earlier comment you made, which is that leadership is in a lot of us. And probably in all of us. But if you don't have the passion, what I'm struck by, and what I hope you read about, are the passions of young people who decide that something's wrong or something needs to be addressed, and the next thing you know, they're out changing the world. And what's really cool right now is the technologies are there to be able to do that kind of thing in ways that were never there before. You can do a Facebook scene, or you can launch something through the internet that you could never have done before. 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been possible to do. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of young people that have decided that they don't like the way things are, and they're going to do something about it. So, other comments about leadership in this sort of generic discussion of leadership? Surely somebody else has a thought. And then nobody that's spoken so far. I want new voices. And I'm going to call on somebody in just a moment. If I don't get and I already see this gentleman right here. Yes, sir. Your thoughts about leadership. And you hit a button, please. Now, don't look back at Dalton. That's not right. You're on your own now. Would you hit your... Yeah.
She has an answer.
No, I called on you, though. You're the man.
I'm nervous.
I understand. Well, but you know what? The more you talk, the less you're nervous. So practice is a great opportunity. So, even if you're nervous, you weren't sitting here not thinking. I'll guarantee you that. So talk at me.
What do I think about leadership?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to have a leader in everything that you do. Somebody's got to lead the way.
Yeah, I might be willing to agree with that. I'm not sure. In the new crowdsourced world we live in, leadership of a solitary kind is going to be less important than leadership of people who can collaborate with others, where my being in charge in the sort of classic sense is going to be less important. I think that's what part of what this new technology is changing about things. What else? What you have to come up with one more comment.
That's all I had.
All right, we're going to go over here. I want one more comment over here, please. Yes, sir.
Sometimes, I don't know, it just gets, like even reading
Thank you.
Sometimes it's just a little draining reading leadership books or articles, and you just wonder what you're doing wrong sometimes, and you don't have that great idea, I don't know. I feel like it can't really be taught, so sometimes you're just searching.
No, and I absolutely understand that comment, because as I look at this, I keep thinking, why do they keep writing these books? I mean, you'd think that it would have been enough, but I think it is challenging. I guess the way I'd say it is that I think leadership can be taught, but I don't think it can be taught in the conventional ways that we teach it. Okay? I think the way it's taught is that when you go out and you do finally have an idea, and I understand how frustrating it is sometimes that you don't. I go for literally years without a good idea, trust me. But when you do, to be passionate enough about it and committed enough that you're going to spend the time and energy that it takes to see if you can make a change. For example, I bet right this moment you have something that you find less than great about Northeastern State University. Some little something. Now, I know it. I know Suzanne's here, and so I know that in the main you love Northeastern, and everything is really terrific. But I bet you there's something in either Northeastern or your life that you'd like to change. Let's say Northeastern for the sake of discussion. And you don't have to say what it is. But I bet that if you decided that you were actually passionate, enthusiastic enough, that I bet you could get, the first thing you'd find is that there were some other people that didn't like that same thing. And second thing, I think you could find a way that you could begin to organize and figure out how to do something about it. And I think the process of going through that experience would be an enormous educative process. Unlike standing here in a class and trying to learn sort of in a sort of classic textbook classroom fashion. So I think that leadership can be learned. To the extent that I have leadership skills today, I don't think they were necessarily born in me. But I don't think I learned them from a book or from a class necessarily. What I learned out of a book and class was ideas that I could think about. What I'd urge you to do is read a whole lot of books, but very few books about leadership. Because the more books you read, the more ideas you're going to get, and the more ideas you get, the more you're going to find opportunity for having a chance to try out leadership. I do like the lists. I think the aphorisms like the Colin Powell, I think those are really cool, because I really like to think about those and then try to relate them to experiences in my life. But I don't try to use them sort of, okay, now I'm going to care. Okay, I'm going to go care. And tomorrow I'm going to do, that's number, I'm going to be optimistic. No, I mean, I don't think it works like that. But I do think as you say optimism, I'll say, maybe that's why the American Democracy Project worked, is because I spent a whole lot of time running around the country talking to people about what a difficult circumstance we're in and how powerful higher education, what an important role higher education has in that. And I was on 40 or 50 campuses talking about that. And maybe that optimism that we could actually do something about this was worthwhile. Of course, I shared that with a whole lot of my colleagues across the country who felt the same way, right? but who had never heard anybody else talking about it, and they thought that this was a concern of their own. The fact is, we share a lot of concerns. We just have a lot of people sitting there saying, well, you know, it's just the way it is, sort of. Okay, any other? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Mehaffy, your comment that you believe that leadership can be learned, and the assumption is that it can also be taught. We have literally hundreds of leadership training programs at colleges and universities throughout the U.S. and worldwide.
Yep.
And I'm just wondering if that's the case. First question, how come we don't have more leaders? Not just in education, but in general, worldwide. And the second question is, have you ever entertained the possibility that perhaps leadership cannot be taught?
Let me answer the second one first. Absolutely, I've always thought about and I think that my general sense, for example, about optimism is that there are people who are programmed to be optimistic, and there are people that are programmed to not be optimistic. Okay, and to the extent that, and I wake up every morning excited. Mostly it's because I don't remember what happened yesterday, and so it really works out pretty well, actually, in all things. But I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I don't think I could feign optimism, which is what Colin Powell says is important as a leader. So I think that there's some core attributes of a human being. I tend to be willing to stand up here and talk, and I know people that would, some people, that would be not as willing to stand up here and talk in front of the group. That's a learned behavior, by the way, but I won't go there. But so I do think there's some core attributes that are harder, that would be hard to create in a leader if you don't already possess them as internal capabilities of yourself. Having said that, I think a lot more people, and so I don't. Maybe not everybody can be a leader, but I think a substantial number of people who are not leaders could be leaders. Back to your first question, I think that I think your observation is spot on. There are a huge number of leadership programs out there. Why don't we have more leaders in this country? And the answer, in part, I think, is that I don't think we go about leadership training in the right way. I think to the extent that we try to put it in a curriculum and put it in a course and put it in a set of lessons to be learned kind of thing, I think we lose the essence of it. I think if I was going to do leadership training, and I'm not a student of these programs, so I don't know how exactly, I'm familiar with some of them and how they operate, but I would spend most of my time gathering ideas, talking about passion, and getting experience. And I wouldn't spend a lot of time reading books about leadership. Except sort of, I'd read them after the fact to help then process and understand. But I wouldn't. But at the front end, I'd do more experiential stuff. And I'm not sure how many of our leadership programs do that. So, great question. Any other last minute question? I want to move to the higher ed piece. But yes, sir.
Do you think being a leader is like? Do you get defined as a leader by your actions, or do you think being a leader is defining your actions?
Wow, great question. There was a great psychology experiment a while back that suggested that you get scared because you run, rather than that you run because you're scared. I suspect it's a little bit of both, but my sense is that when we start out in leadership roles, we don't typically think of ourselves as leaders. We start like we got a passionate idea. We're concerned about something. We decide we're going to do something. We try to organize some other people, and before long we notice that people are looking up to us. But we didn't start as a leader saying, "Oh well, I'm the leader. We're going to make this work." It sort of worked out that way. I think that's the way a lot of that works.
So are you kind of saying like you're defining your actions?
Yeah, I think that I would focus much more on the actions than on the notion of being a leader.
So defining your actions is what would make you.
Right. I think you're right. Yes, that strikes me as the more logical way that would go. I mean, there are people I saw a lot of people who would, in the military in particular, who would walk in and by dint of their position were acknowledged as the leader. They weren't leaders by any stretch of the imagination. They were positional authority, but there was nothing else about them that suggested leadership. I mean, everybody saluted because they had to, but nobody paid any attention. And that really is dramatic when you can have that kind of instant positional authority, but in the long run, you look back and nobody's behind you. So I think it is. I think it has to be you start with action. So, okay, enough of that. Let's move on to higher ed, because I'm supposed to talk about higher ed. Would you like to join me up here to talk about higher ed? No, I'm sorry. I just I couldn't resist teasing you. You are going to learn to be less nervous, I promise you. The young woman that works for me, who's just leaving to go to a doctoral program, Cecilia Orphan, the first time she stood up in front of a group, and I made her stand up because I was deliberately trying to get her, she broke out in hives. I mean, she just had welts all over her neck and her face, and I mean, she looked like a mess. And she said, "I can't do this." And I said, "Yes, you can. You just have to keep doing it until you quit breaking out in hives." And by God, she kept doing it. She kept breaking out in hives, and now she and I just saw it the other day. It was so cute. She stood up in front of the entire. We had an Ask You staff meeting, and she did a 10-minute presentation, and she was wearing a high neck collar, just in case, And she walked up to me afterwards and pulled down the collar and said, "Look, no hives." It was really cool. A lot of this is learned stuff. A lot of this is stuff that you can do, but you got to do it. You can't just, because you can be. What do people say? Public speaking is feared more than death by some people. So, anyway, okay, higher education. Let me tell you what we're trying to change in higher education. And I have a very modest goal. I'm only interested in changing American higher education. I don't really care whether French higher education and Chinese higher education gets changed, but I really am interested in American higher education because I think we're in a world of hurt. And I think we're in a world of hurt for, well, let me put a couple of facts on the table. We were first in the world in college completions. 20 years ago, we're now 10th or 12th. We are being, we may be the first generation, this generation now with us, may be the first generation in the history of this country to be less well educated than the generation before. The first generation in our history to be less well educated. We have enormous polarization and increasing numbers of very rich and increasing numbers of very poor, and not much in between. In fact, I characterize it as a war on the middle class. And we've got students with debt loads now, average debt loads of $22,000 leaving college. A debt obligation that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. The only debt obligation, virtually the only debt obligation that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Thanks to our legislators and the powerlessness of students to be able to do something about it. And then we get to Academically Adrift, which is the publication recently that said students that go through 4 years of college, 36% of them have zero gains in critical thinking skills after 4 years. Now that's, remember, not 36% of all students, it's 36% of the students who graduate. That's only 50% of the ones who started, because we have a 50% dropout rate. So, as Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you? And the answer is, for this country, it's not working very well, because we are in a global economy. We are in a brain race. I said at lunch, if you take curve of the normal distribution and you have the bell-shaped curve of the normal distribution, got a few smart people over here, a few less smart over here, and most of the rest of us in the middle. You got more smart people in China than you got people in the United States. Did you hear what I just said? Country that owns all of our debt, and we now owe $14 trillion. Most of it in the hands of the Chinese. Got more smart people in China than we got people in the United States. That means we better be real smart and be able to operate real effectively in a global marketplace, in the global marketplace of ideas, in the global marketplace of commerce, in the global marketplace of democracy. We better be able to do well in places that we haven't thought about. And right now we're not doing well. And the answer is, the reason that we're not doing well is because higher education is not doing well. And so I want to, as Don indicated on the intro, I want to reimagine undergraduate education. I want to blow it up and start over again because it's not working. And so I want to think differently about the course. I want to think differently about student services. I want to think differently about the entire enterprise, from soup to nuts. And so I'm spending a lot of time going around the country. I've been on, by this summer, by July this summer, I will have been on in 18 situations where I was talking. I've been in 3 statewide meetings. I've been in on I don't know, 12 or 14 campuses. I've been a lot of places talking about what's going wrong and what we're going to do about it. I think there are answers out there. And the good news is I think there are some really good answers out there. But I think it's going to take a lot of people starting to raise questions before we get to the point that we can say, okay, let's do something. So my job is to sort of sound the alarm and to offer convening opportunities for people to come together. So, for example, we launched the Red Balloon Project. I'll tell you what the name it means in just a second. We launched the Red Balloon Project last summer in Chicago. We had a lot of red balloon work this winter at the Academic Affairs meeting in Orlando in February. We're going to have a whole lot more work on course redesign at the summer meeting in Portland. And we're going to keep pushing and talking and thinking about how we can enlist a lot of other people in the effort to try to reimagine undergraduate education. Red Balloon was my aha moment. One of the reasons I said read lots of books is that you get aha moments when you read books. They actually have ideas. It's cool, you know. It's really fun. I read everywhere I go. I'm reading a book by a millennial right now on democracy and this new era of technology. But I for a long time I said I was too busy to read. And then I finally said, you know, if you're ever going to have any ideas, you're going to have to read. You don't just get ideas out of the ozone. They actually come from other people. And so if you're going to get, so I can now carve out time. Mostly I'm on airplanes, and so I have lots of time, so it's great. But I carve out time to read and to be sure that I'm trying to read really cutting-edge kinds of things. But I had an aha moment in one of those when I read the story of Red Balloon. The Red Balloon was the DARPA Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. It started right after World War II. Skunk Works of the Department of Defense created all kinds of things like GPS. But along the way, one of the things they created was a thing called the Internet in 1969. And on the 40th anniversary of the Internet, in 2009, they offered $40,000, 40th anniversary, for anyone who could find 10 randomly scattered bright red weather balloons at various locations throughout the continental United States, 3,000 by 2,000 miles, right? $40,000. You don't have. You're probably not getting a PhD in red balloon finding, are you, Laura? No. I mean, how do you do something like that? Well, the winning team found the red balloons in 8 hours and 52 minutes, and I went, oh my God. Or now I would say OMG, of course, but you know. But I said, my God, something really fundamental is happening. Something's happening about the way that we discover, aggregate, and disseminate knowledge. And what they did was they used a scheme that said if Sarah finds it, then she gets, for a balloon, $2,000. Now, each balloon is actually worth $4,000, right? But if she gets 2, if she finds it. But if she doesn't find it, but you find it, but you invited her to join, then you get 2, she gets 1,000. And so far. So if you found it, but all of you invited each other, then it's 2,000, 1,000, 500, 250. Well, you can't, by the way, ever get to the 4,000 that way, right? You'll get just close, but you'll never. So you can actually, it's a mathematically workable scheme, trust me. The last person's going to get a penny or something. But anyway, but 8 hours and 52 minutes, and they found balloons scattered from 3,000 miles by 2,000 miles. Okay? And I thought, but I think it's both an analogy and a metaphor. It's a metaphor, first of all, for the way that knowledge is now being discovered, aggregated, and disseminated. It's about us, not me. It's about group, not single expert. And the second is, it's also an analogy. It's an analogy for how we might work together in higher education. This is a horribly difficult problem. How do you change higher education that's been around since the 11th century? Been around since the 11th century, operating on a 19th century agrarian model to produce life, to prepare students for life in the 21st century. Not working. So changing it is really complex. Rules and policies and state laws and federal laws and practices that have been gone on for 400 and 500 and 600 years suddenly have to change. So I think we've got to work together collaboratively and share ideas, because that's the only way we'll all figure this out. So we're going to go to Portland and we're going to try to redesign courses. We're going to design things like freshman comp all over again. Blow it up and start over again. We're going to do things like we're going to bring in Rosetta Stone to talk about foreign language instruction. Because guess what? Rosetta Stone may know more than we do about foreign language instruction, at least the way it's currently taught. And we're going to start thinking about really creative ways to do a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, we're back to leadership. Because this isn't about fixing a course or changing a policy. It's about culture. It's about culture. It's about the belief systems that make this campus work. I'll tell you the final story. I was doing, we did a study. We couldn't figure out why. We were looking at graduation rates across the 420 institutions. Remember, we have institutions as small as 1,000 students up in Maine, and the largest of our institutions is Central Florida, 56,000 students, with the second largest in the United States, and everything in between. And you guys are sort of more typical of the kinds of institutions that most of our institutions are. And I kept looking at those graduation rates and seeing this enormous variation in success rates across institutions. I said, I wonder what's going on. So we disaggregated, because we crossed 6 Carnegie classifications. We disaggregated into like kinds of institutions, okay? Rural, relatively small, whatever the categories were. There were 12 of these clusters. First thing we saw when we put them into clusters is, guess what? The graduation variation within a cluster of like institutions was as great as the graduation variation across 420 institutions, okay? So even when we got people in clusters that were similar, the graduation rate was wildly different in that same cluster. How do you explain that? So we sent out accreditation-like teams, kick over the rocks, look behind the doors, ask people, how do you explain this? We looked for administrative structures, we looked for programs, we looked for funding. I mean, what could possibly explain among institutions that look so much alike how you could get this amount of variation? And guess what? We could not find any differences that predicted that variation. There was only one thing that predicted that variation, and that was a belief in the culture of that institution that their job was to help students be successful. And in the institutions where people believe that deeply, they put in all sorts of processes and administrative structures and everything else. But it didn't start by bolting on a bunch of structures and programs that didn't have any connection to the institution. It started by saying, we've got to believe that our job is not sorting machine. It's not to weed people out. It's not to say you're really not here, but to say everyone that walks through our doors is going to graduate if we can do anything about it. Isn't that interesting? It was about culture. And so and culture is ultimately about leadership. Because what leaders do at any place in an organization is they really ultimately don't just shape policy or practice. What they really do is shape culture. And so at the end of the day, your job as leaders, wherever you are, and leadership is not at the top, by the way. It's leadership is all the way through an organization. But leadership is about changing cultures, and that means changing belief structures. So we're almost done. How much time? Are they supposed to leave earlier? Are they 3 o'clock? Okay, so comments. I'm done. I don't have anything else in my head. So it's up to you now. So if you're going to ride with me, you gotta say something. Yes, thank you.
I think one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people just don't have any drive in them anymore. They're okay with just floating by and making life just as easy as possible, and they don't have any ambition.
I would agree with that, but I also think that those who have that ambition, those who are given those opportunities are forced into a situation where it's not a community of education. It's you have to be the best so you can get ahead. And I think that's what we're taught. I think we're taught that we have to do for ourselves because no one else will. That we have to, and it takes away from this community perspective of we can all make change. And it's more selfish. Focus on changing things for yourself. Make your situation better. And I think that's what's caused this huge rift in what you see between the quality leaders that of yesterday and what we're putting out today, which is selfish, think for yourselfers.
Well, the American culture has always been plagued by this problem of community versus rugged individualist. I mean, if you go back to our very founding, from the very beginning, there was always this tension between the frontier spirit and the macho guy and all of that, and then this sense of belonging and this sense of connection to one another. The irony is that I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a culture that is now encouraging. I'll get mine, Jack, and if you don't get it, that's just the way it is. And so poor people get cut from 40 weeks of unemployment insurance to 20 weeks. Hey, well, tough. It's just the way life is, in the richest country on earth. You see my political prejudice is showing, but I do think that there's an enormous amount of focus on us as individuals, and not enough. Now, the irony is that the tools that we now have bring community possible as never before. I do think your observation is I see essentially a whole lot of students sleepwalking through universities, literally sleepwalking through universities, their entire college career. What I worry about when I see that is not the students themselves, although I worry about them. I worry about what would it take for us to change this environment where that would no longer be the case. My sense of what we've done historically for faculty is faculty have been responsible for the design, the delivery, and the assessment of individual courses. I think increasingly faculty are going to have to design the learning environments. Some of those learning environments are environments without faculty. I mean, if you look, for example, at gaming, I watch kids get involved in games that they play internationally with kids around the world, and they get to different levels, and they have to do certain things to get to certain level. They don't have a faculty member in the middle of all that stuff. They're just doing it. But I'm troubled about the observation because I think it's inaccurate. But rather than say, well, it's those damn kids that they just don't care anymore, my first question is, well, what are we doing wrong? Because this ought to be the most exciting, energizing, exhilarating period of your life. But thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. Other comments? There was yes, sir.
So how exactly do you plan on combating the systemic rote memorization of knowledge in higher education at times, and trying, instead of getting back to critical thinking skills?
One of the things I'm going to do is wherever I go, I'm going to talk about how pitiful it is that we can't be more imaginative than to do just what you said, which is that to spend way too much time. I mean, imagine. Try this one on for size. Okay? You're going to sit and tell me things as my professor? Really? You're going to tell me things when I've got the whole damn world in front of me right here that I can look stuff up? And you're going to be deliverer of facts? I mean, I don't think so. I mean, this has got more horsepower than took us to the moon, for God's sakes, this little thing right here, right? And so I'm going to, first of all, challenge the prevailing assumption about what we're doing. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push hard. We're working with test groups all over the country to do better tests so that we can then expose those folks who are doing great work because they're actually challenging students to think critically. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know how many of you remember. I know a few folks who look a little bit closer to me than to some of you remember Father Guido Sarducci. No, ma'am, it was not you, I promise. But you remember Guido Sarducci, the 5-minute university? Everything you learned in college you could remember in 5 minutes, and actually remember that actually registration took a minute and a half of that 5, you remember? So it's a... part of what I'm going to do is raise questions. I mean, the fact is there are a substantial number of people on our campuses, both students, faculty, and others, who know it isn't working. Now, we're all in it, so it's not like we're going to say, well, it's not working and I'm going to quit and just not eat for the next 6 years or something. I mean, that's not realistic. But there are a lot of people out there, I believe, who know that it's not working and who know that we need to do something differently. But they don't have by themselves the kind of support that would allow them to do something differently. So my job and the job of a number of others that are doing this, as I see it at least, is to say, how can we be supportive of those people that want to change their institutions? And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to hold them up for others to see. We're going to support them and celebrate them and publicize them, and we're going to give them lots of other kinds of support from others around, connect them to others that are doing the same kind of work. And I think that's an important part of this as well.
Let's us listen to him and give us his opinions on life. And I think that I've learned a lot from him in this just 16 weeks of knowing him about what mistakes he made and that I don't have to make because I learned from him. You think as students that maybe we should be more curious about stuff going, okay, this is just a guy teaching my class, but instead as a person that can teach us life experience also in the class.
Well, that's back to Laura and our debate, or discussion, not debate. It's not a debate because we don't really disagree about what constitutes learning in a university. And for me, well, first of all, you're going to have, between now and the age 45, most of you in this room who are 20 or 18 to 22, between now and 45, you'll have 5 to 7 different jobs in possibly 3 to 5 different industries. So job training in the narrowest frame is virtually is almost absurd. Technical colleges that in 2 years train people for a specific job, 50% of what they train is obsolete by the time the student graduates. So what we've got to train people to do, educate people for, not train them, educate them, is for how to operate in life and how to navigate life and how to navigate a world that's increasingly complex and navigate with others that are trying to do the same thing. And so for me, that means that a whole lot of that kind of education ought to be held up as equally important with whether you've gotten the chemistry that you needed. You know, when the National Association of Manufacturers complains about college students as recent graduates that they're hiring, I've never heard them once. I've listened to the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, Business Roundtable, keep going. And I listen to all of them in Washington. You know what they never say? They never say, she just didn't know enough biology. He didn't know enough accounting. You know what they say? They don't know how to work with people that are different. Don't know how to organize to get something done. Don't know how to communicate effectively. don't know how to organize to get something accomplished. Those are going to be life skills and career skills that we ought to be really focusing on. And leadership is there's no greater leader than a teacher. In a 6th grade class that's got, 30 wormy little, 12-year-olds wandering around loose in the streets. I mean, that you're trying to get to believe that something's important. I mean, that's leadership. I mean, leadership's at the core of a lot of this work, because leadership is persuading people that we ought to do something collaboratively. And do something we weren't otherwise going to do, along the lines that you suggested with the people that are sort of dropping out. Well, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to hearing more, as I will, from President Betts about the trials and tribulations of this class. Thank you so much.